Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday edition. We do these frequently. We missed last week, but we've been doing these frequently at 8:30 p.m. Wednesday evening, trying to do them week by week. And I'm Rich Pertel, chair of the Libertarian Party of New York Legislative Affairs Subcommittee. Got a full panel of guests tonight, more than we would usually have, but let's see how we manage and try to keep this still under an hour like we do every week. And let's start with who will speak first, Assemblyman Brian Manctillo. And he's for District 130, and Jim Dayton is one of the constituents. And thank you to Jim for getting Brian to agree to come on this evening. And he will go up first to discuss 82681. Then we'll follow up with Anthony Golly with Sheets and Bailey Associates. I believe the firm's out of Liverpool, correct?
That's right.
Yep. So he'll be third, and James Sacco in the upper corner is out of the Vestal area as a private attorney. We'll have him up second. So these two gentlemen will hit some issues with 82681 and OSHA as well. And the rest of us amateurs, we're not lawyers. Tim O'Connor, who ran for New York State Senate 51 last year. Thomas Queter, who ran for Senate 52. Jim Dayton, who's an active libertarian in his area. And Michael Vasquez, political commentator, the dragon of the Southern Tier, right? The Binghamton area. He's on as well. Welcome him aboard. So the rest of us will be jumping in and out here, and then I will probably not talk a whole lot tonight, given it's a big panel, and I'll try to do a lot of the behind-the-scenes management of all the comments coming in. Hopefully, we get a lot of good comments. People, if they have things to say, questions to ask, please shoot them in. And without further ado, let's get started with Assemblyman Manctillo.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me on this evening. It's a privilege to be here. I just actually got in my office back in Wayne County out of Albany this afternoon, heading back. And we'll talk about Bill 2681B. And when this bill did come to the floor, I took a look at it, of course, before it got to the floor. And like many bills that come forward in Albany, they kind of put the cart before the horse. Instead of getting all the players involved that are actually going to be, involved with this bill if this bill passes and the governor signs it into law, instead of doing that, they come up with these bills that everybody's going to have to deal with. And as I look through this bill and everything that was involved in it, there are so many gray areas. And speaking with some of the businesses prior to this bill coming to the floor, it's not a good bill. There's just too many, like I said, gray areas that people really don't know how it's all going to work out. And looking at the time frame of the bill, parts of it are going to be put into place 30 days after this bill is signed into law. Other parts of it will be 180 days. And this is really not a good bill for businesses right now. I'm not sure it's a good bill for employees either. Again, we're pushing things forward. And yesterday on the floor, we talked about the Department of Labor not being able to keep up with things now. And in this bill, the Department of Labor is going to work, or the Commissioner of Labor is going to work with the Department of Health to bring something like this forward. And they don't have the time, the staff, or the money to make this happen. And there's many parts of this that are just going to end up many lawsuits. What is an airborne disease at the time? There's so many questions that could not be answered. And that was probably the main reason why I couldn't support this bill, because when we asked the questions, we couldn't get answers to the bill. I don't know how deep you want me to go into the bill. I can go through the bill quite a bit, or
I mean, that was a pretty good explanation, I think.
That's a good start.
Yeah. My biggest part of why I started getting against this bill, it was like line 17. And it said pretty much government has no, anybody that works for the government or whatever can't use this law against themselves, basically. But we can punish all the businesses for it.
Yeah, so this is another instance of government making rules and not following them themselves. They've exempted them. So if a child gets sick at school, there's no recourse. If a police officer gets sick at the barracks or the station, there's no recourse. If a social worker gets sick at the county building, there's no recourse. But if somebody gets sick at Walmart or a small mom and pop, there's potentially damages to be had.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And really, in the situation with this pandemic, who really knows where they come in contact with it? And nobody really knows. It could be 12 hours, 24 hours, 2 or 3 days, or a week, or even longer. So
Yep.
I just don't see how you're ever going to implement this and make this thing work.
On that note, I think they've been saying that this has a 14-day incubation period, hence the 14-day quarantines that we would go through when we were exposed or had symptoms.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the other bills that we debated on the floor, I brought that up. If you have a cashier working in a Walmart or a big store, and people are coming in and she's interacting with them, who knows where she's going to get it, or the people that are coming through the line. There's just, like I said, way too many gray areas. And how are we going to do this?
Yeah, just while we're on this note, it seems like there's a lot of potential for what I've been hearing called trolling lawsuits, where there's not actually a victim, nothing actually happens that's wrong, but they're able to sue these businesses if they find any kind of infraction. Is that the case? Is that what I've been hearing, right?
I think you're absolutely right. I think we're opening up a can of worms, and one of my biggest concerns is keeping our businesses here in New York State. If I'm a business and I'm looking at this, and this is what the state's going to put basically down my throat, and we got to deal with this, more than likely some of our big businesses are going to leave the state, as they already have done. And this is not good for New York. That's why I said earlier that when we craft these pieces of legislation, before we craft them, we should have the meeting set up with the businesses, with other employees, to get all the input before we actually craft this. It's very unfortunate that people that become are legislators in Albany think they're experts on all this. I'm not an expert on all this. I do my homework. I ran a small business and a larger business, and I know what will work and what will not work. And this will not work.
It just seems astounding to me that with today's economy in New York, with over 100,000 small businesses being shut down, and now this, larger businesses can potentially absorb it, but they're not going to want to. Smaller businesses are more likely to go under over these issues. Poverty kills people too.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And one of the other things that we do when we're in Albany, at least I do, and other legislators, it's not just the debate on the floor; it's the communication with some of the sponsors or other members on both sides of the aisle prior to it coming to the floor and after the vote's done. As I said, this is just a terrible bill. And one of the things that we constantly emphasize in Albany is the majority side seems to think that employers are bad. And we keep saying they're not bad. As an employer, I want to keep my employees healthy. I want them to be happy. I want my business to grow so I can help them grow as families and giving them more money. And I don't know where that mindset comes from. And then when I saw this just hits me right in the forehead. And it's like, again, we're going after employers again.
Yeah, it's absurd. There's no other word for it. It's absurd.
Before we go further, and I know Jim's about to speak, and then Anthony to address some of the more legal questions on this, I want to ask a question. I have a lot of items I want to speak about later as well, but Assemblyman, when you were on the floor and this bill was being debated, a very simple question would be, did those in favor of this bill provide any medical or scientific evidence or reports that support the conclusions they make here, or did they just say, this seems to be the best idea, we're going with it?
Yeah, I think what we see in Albany is you get a special interest group or a group of employees that feel like they've been wronged or they're put in a bad position, especially with COVID. And the legislator listens to those individuals, and then he or she crafts a piece of legislation like this. And they really don't listen to anybody. They listen to this small group and they want to act on it quickly because, as we all know, whenever you have a situation, never waste a crisis. And we're seeing so many pieces of legislation being brought forward that I don't know how any business or any entity can keep up with this in New York State.
I'd be curious, what's this going to do to the liability insurance rates of businesses in the future?
I think no one knows whether it's workman's comp liability, What happens if you have one or two people get really sick and something happens bad, or who knows? And those are the questions that we ask. And one of the other points that I constantly bring up in Albany is when we roll something out like this, why do we not do a small pilot program prior to going statewide? Pick a couple businesses, let's implement this and see how it goes. And an easy way of doing that would be, let's do it at the state level. Why are state employees exempt from this? Why are all the different parts of the state exempt from this? I don't agree with that. And if that's a perfect testing zone right there, it's not going to cost a whole lot more money. And those are things that I think we should do, because I know in business it's better sometimes to take baby steps than a huge leap. And again, we're hurting New York, we're hurting our employers, and ultimately we're going to hurt our employees, because if these businesses go away, where are they going to go?
Yeah, I have a quick comment or question. Like the details of this seem so nebulous. How in fact is this law going to eventually get administered, and by whom and by how, and who gets to empower the new regulations that are going to get written, and what are going to be the punishments, and is there going to be a right to correct? And without due respect to the lawyers that are with us tonight, isn't this just kind of like a prop for the trial lawyer lobby? I mean, isn't that what this is? Isn't it just a shakedown of small and medium-sized businesses? It seems like to me.
Well, I'll just be right up front.
I threw a lot at you there. I apologize.
No, you're fine. I really think that in New York and with the leadership that we have in Albany right now, the more they want the state to be involved in every aspect of everybody's life and every business that's out there. And they just want to keep their fingers involved. That's why when these bills come forward, as I said, we should involve the people that are going to have to deal with these bills to get the input before they're crafted. And what we're told on the floor when we ask these questions, well, we'll work the details out. No. When you're in a business, you don't work the details out afterwards. You work them out prior to implementing something, and then you bring it forward. And they just don't seem to understand that.
Yeah, thank you. I don't, with this law, I feel like these issues are already covered with the Department of Health. These issues are already covered. Like you said, as an employer, you want your employees to be safe. As an employer, I want my employees to be safe, but I also want them to have some personal autonomy in what kind of decisions that they make. And if they don't want to, if they're not comfortable, they should feel free to move someplace else to a different job. So I think we're losing any kind of sense of adult responsibility here when we see bills like this. And again, my question goes back to, like, how is this going to get administered? We're going to create a whole new body of graft and corruption. And excuse me for being so frank with you, sir. I appreciate you being here, and I'm not waving my finger in your face. I want to be clear about that. But don't they have to create a whole new administration for this? Yeah, thank you. So they got to create a whole new administrative system to administer this bill, don't they? Somehow.
Those are questions we ask. Who's going to implement it? Who's going to do the bill? And what I'm afraid of is, much like through COVID, where we saw the state liquor authority going around to bars and restaurants, and really, I'm sorry, I'll be a little frank, more like the Gestapo was back in World War II. They just come into a business and say, look, you're doing this wrong, we're going to fine you this much. This is definitely what we do not need to do. And instead of coming up with legislation like this, why don't we put something together where we can go out and help businesses look at what they're doing there, come up with some solutions to better the air system, and say, hey, if you can afford this, let's do this. If you can't, let's go this way. Those are the positive things. But you're right. They again, I get this feeling all the time that many members do not like employers. They just think they're bad people.
Those are some really good points in there. And my question from this all along, one of the first things that New York did that I remember is they rolled out a form on their website for you to turn in your neighbors or your loved ones or a business for the masking and social distancing rules at $1,000 fines. I mean, that doesn't seem like the appropriate way to handle people and their behavior in a situation like this. I would almost argue that maybe coming up with some actual well-founded advice and offering it would be a better implementation than coming down with punishment and fear mongering.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that from the governor's office throughout the whole pandemic, at least 3/4 of the way through. And we know as leaders and business people and even in our own homes as fathers and mothers and husbands and wives that we don't want to hurt the people that we represent. We don't want to hurt our families. We need to nurture them and help them get through life. And that's what our governor should be doing with our businesses. They are such a crucial part of our economy and who we are in New York, especially our small mom and pop operations that probably can't stand a lot of this. This is going to get them to a point where they're going to say, you know something, enough is enough. I don't want to do it, or if I want to do it, I'm going to move to another state.
I'd like to get moving along now to Jim. I know Jim Sacco, because we've had we're into this. Thank you for your time, Assemblyman. But I'd like to give Jim a chance to speak here now too.
All right, you're welcome.
One of our esteemed guests, but certainly, Assemblyman, you'll be able to interject opinions here as we can go forward as we have been so far. But Jim, I'd like to have you have the floor for a couple minutes, if you could.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for having me, Rich, and I want to thank the Assemblyman for all your input and what you did up there in Albany for us. Certainly, the economic issues, they're huge. They need to be talked about. I'm glad we're talking about them. I would argue, though, there's an even deeper set of issues that's implicated here. They're very, very fundamental. The original Constitution guarantees, even before you get to the Bill of Rights, guarantees every citizen a little r Republican form of government. The New York State Constitution, of course, gives us a Senate and Assembly. We're supposed to be represented. But what I'm hearing is there's really no science behind this at all. This was just put together haphazardly. There's all kinds of ambiguity. And there is little question that this is going to hurt businesses. Really, this is not, I think, the most charitable way to put this. What's going on in Albany right now with this legislation, the Assemblyman here accepted, of course, that right is not being exercised in good faith. We're not really getting representation. When the legislature just shoves something through without any rational basis, simply because a special interest group or two wants it done, basically punts to administrative agencies to have them fill in all these blanks, leaves all of these ambiguities. We have legislation really without any rational basis that may be void for vagueness, that has an extraordinary economic impact on individuals in the state as a whole. So I think there's some very fundamental issues from a constitutional perspective, and something that really any citizen should be very upset about. So, but I think it's like anything else. I can draft a 35-page contract as well as anybody, but I always tell clients at the end of the day, it's going to rely on good faith, and I don't think the people who are promoting this legislation are really acting in good faith relative to the citizens in New York State.
Yeah. May I say something on that really quick?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the things I think that we need to do, at least me as a legislator, is to bring. I look at the sponsors of the bill, and I know a lot of them. And one of my jobs is to bring them to our area, to meet with our businesses, to meet with our small mom and pop stores, and really let them, pick out a few of the businesses and let them discuss with them how bad this bill really is. I'm not even sure if the governor's even signed it into law yet. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to find that out tomorrow. But anyways, yeah, they need to know.
It's my understanding that he signed it and demanded something called chapter amendments or chapter reviews within the next couple of weeks. I have no idea what that means. And it sounds like him just doing his weird flex, like demonstrating his power all over the state. I don't know.
Well, the chapter amendments, some of the pieces in this piece of legislation, his staff will look at, and if they don't think it's good for New York State, which is surprising, so as much as I do not agree with our governor on many, many aspects of what he does. Well, one thing that he does do is if he sees something that he knows will not work, he'll call back to the legislators and tell them to do an amendment to that. And we may see some of those pieces on the floor, which is good for us because lots of times, a lot of the points that we make on the floor, the governor's office listens to our debates and they listen to what we say, and he actually brings those back for amendments.
Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Another thing with the deference given to whatever administrative agencies are going to administer this, it would seem to me that there's very fertile ground for abuse. You know, you can, someone is a well-heeled business, maybe the administrative agency takes a little bit easier on that entity, and maybe someone who's very involved in the Libertarian Party as a businessman, maybe the administrative agency isn't quite so understanding. It just seems that it's very, very ripe for abuse with all the authority given to the administrators of this legislation.
That's a very excellent point, because in many situations of enforcing a law or a doctrine from the state, not necessarily police-related law, we do see winners and losers being chosen. I mean, we've seen this before with other things. How can we possibly think it's not going to happen with this?
I was talking with I have a customer in Ithaca who's a mid-sized manufacturer. Unfortunately, they're in the process really of going out of business. At one point, we built the plant in 2001. They had as many as 100 employees, and now they're dwindling down. But anyway, the safety officer is saying that he's being asked to start to develop a safety plan to comply with this A2681 when the state government hasn't even really produced their standards. So I think that's backwards. I think the state should have the standards fully developed. And again, if you read the law, it says they're supposed to be customized per industry. So they should really go out to the stakeholders, get their opinion, develop the standards, give them back to those same stakeholders. Then they can develop, customize it as they wish to, tweak whatever the state standard is. But it seems like this is upside down, where they're asking all the businesses to go out. And not only is it a duplication effort where all these different businesses are creating standards from whole cloth without any full template to work with from the state yet, but I think this is setting themselves up. The state's going to see what all these businesses come up with and say, oh, this is how high we can set the bar, because based on what the businesses seem to be saying to us and what they will accept. So it's kind of a test. I don't agree with it whatsoever. I think the state should, privately meet with the stakeholders, develop this. The law says this. So they're supposed to meet with the stakeholders, develop the standard, the model standard, then give it out to everybody, and then they come back with their customized template. Now, the safety officer I talked with said he's just going to add this to his emergency response plan for hurricanes and wildfires and whatever else he has in there already. He's going to add it into that. But I think the timeline's important and something we have to keep drilling on and pressuring about, and to make sure that the state isn't making undue expectations of businesses. That they're not. They should be. Mum's the word. They should say, look, don't put any effort into us until we give you a standard. Otherwise you're just making more work for all the businesses. They're already being jeopardized enough by this law. They don't need to be, beat up on it any worse.
So it sounds like our government doesn't want to do the work.
Well, that could be one motive too, that they're relying on all these businesses to do the work that the law says the DOH and the DOL are supposed to be doing. So, that could be a motive. Like I say, the where to set the bar motive, I think, could certainly be there. They want to see what, test the waters, see what the various businesses will tolerate before the state develops a standard. Maybe that's a motive. I don't know. There could be a lot of motives, but if you read the law, this wasn't the way it was supposed to go. The standard's supposed to come from the state first. The businesses shouldn't be jumping through flaming hoops already. They should be, further on before that happens.
Rich, I'd like to add 2 points to what you brought up, because the cart before the horse is what the assemblyman said. out of the gates, right? And it's not only in principle the cart before the horse. From a rollout standpoint, it constantly puts the cart before the horse. For example, if you're a business, if you're an employer, how are you supposed to meet or exceed the state's plan if it's not even out yet, right? So the plan's going to come out, and employers will have to decide, am I going to put this time and effort into developing a plan that meets some of these items mentioned in the law, or am I just going to wait and adopt the state's plan? And perhaps that's what the state wants. Perhaps the state wants to just force employers to adopt their plan, at least intermittently, at least for the first 6 months or the first year. But the second point is, and before I leave that, it's forcing a private business to adopt policies that a government agency is not politically accountable, in the sense that an assemblyman can be voted out, assemblyman can be voted in. A person on an agency or a commissioner is appointed or hired or not politically accountable. So it creates that issue of self-governance of a business. The second point about this is how are small businesses going to absorb that cost? COVID, in general, devastated small businesses with the lockdowns. So we're going to reopen up, and we're going to, as a state, require these policies. And again, my practice benefits from it. As somebody said earlier today, it's no slight to the attorneys, but it's kind of just a field day, perhaps, for trial attorneys, and that was Tim. But here we want to help our clients, but again, it's so much. The employee handbooks have gone from this to this. So if you're an employer, you have to have all of these things adopted. Sexual harassment policy, which was a huge deal last year, 2 years ago. Now this HERO Act. So the point is, it's not good for small business. It's a matter of policy, and these small businesses are already crawling out of debt, and they have this administrative burden to handle again. This is more of a policy comment, but the legal black letter law requires this policy to be revisited, and perhaps there could be a blessing in disguise of the agency running with it, because they have this intelligible principle, as it's called, to build upon. Perhaps the guidance could, and the regulations, cure a lot of the faults and blurs in the statute, but maybe it won't. And lastly, I want to throw this out there: what is the triggering event? Does an emergency need to be declared by the governor's office? Does the World Health Organization need to say that there's an epidemic or a pandemic? When do these plans actually go into effect? We have these plans that are going to be required to be on the books for employers, but when do they actually have to follow them? When a pandemic is declared, when an epidemic is declared, when the Department of Health says so. And again, it's another ambiguity. Hopefully we get some guidance on it.
Well, and there's another good point in that. As we saw with this pandemic, how long did it take us to figure out how to do testing? How long did it get us to figure out how to know exactly what the symptoms were, or whether or not somebody was infected with that particular contagion or virus in this case? So the next time, what's going to happen with these punishments? That they're arguably punishments, right? I think we all agree. What's going to happen with those in the time period of, say, a next pandemic where we're figuring it out again?
Yeah, like figuring out what essential means. I don't like the government giving guidance, because I saw last year around this time, all of our clients calling asking, can I go work? Can I go to this project? The construction owner saying I can't, but I have a schedule. Well, are you essential? Who the heck knows? Because the guidance was so ambiguous. So hopefully the DOH, DOL can actually give some real guidance, but the track record historically is no. And the track record as well is in economic declines, when you're coming out of an economic downturn, the Department of Labor is looking for money. And I don't like to see this statute in the labor law, because it tells me that they're looking to shake down for willful, non-willful violations as much money as they can to get out of the hole that they've put themselves in as well. And guess what? They don't have the administrative burden of adopting these plans and administering these plans themselves, so they could dedicate their resources to policing them, being the Gestapo of these policies.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what we're seeing here is a whole new set of arbitrary and ambiguous, largely undecided rules that the people are required, or businesses in this case, are required to follow. That's so wide open for abuse in so many directions.
And Tom, I'd like to follow up on that and maybe even ask Jim, because he mentioned rational basis, and as us lawyers know, that's a constitutional standard. But here, like Jim pointed out, this has been punted to an agency, and there's even more deference in that situation. So there will definitely be constitutional challenges to it, but I'm curious if this was in any of the minutes or discussions on the floor before this bill was passed, that, hey, in light of these challenges that we're expecting, should we punt to this agency, because then there's even more deference. And another theme of 2020 was experts. Remember, leave it to the experts. And that's always an excuse for punting to agencies. Well, we're just legislators. We know how to get a law passed, but these laws are still very technical, or rather these industries that are so technical. We need experts to promulgate regulations that are specific. So I wonder if that will create even more burdens to a successful constitutional challenge. That is the fact that it's punted to an agency.
Well, I'd like to jump in for a second, because there have been a lot of things that have been highlighted so far that are very, very important. And I hope people will be looking at this from my own review of this, because it's not just that this is a bad law, it's impractical. It is not possible to actually make this happen, because if we're going by the definition of A2681, which was passed on May 5th, as far as I can tell, Section 1, Item E, it's impractical, because this is the flu. What we're talking about is the flu. And when the flu season comes around, all of these things we're speaking about must be implemented. It's beyond impractical, because it also, I believe, has a Fourth Amendment and HIPAA violation. Jim and Anthony may be able to answer this better, because of the health screenings that are now going to be required, at whose cost we don't know. And this is going to reveal what information to employers that are required to now have that. There's a problem inherent in that on so many levels. And there is no exception throughout the entire bill that I could find that says that if you have a pre-existing medical condition, then, and which would preclude you from either wearing a mask or being able to get in certain vaccines or to take certain medical actions, well, then how does that affect that employee or that employer? There is no answer on that. It is completely vague and missing, which is a vital component, which we're seeing now with people who are getting the vaccines or not getting vaccines and being required to have vaccine passports, and yet they, by their own medical history, cannot. And now they're supposed to reveal their personal medical histories. There's a problem here. Going into Section 1EH, has anyone considered the cost of air filtration? And Rich, I know you know something about this. Imagine every small business owner, every building owner in New York State that is now required to change every one of their air filtration systems, regardless of the cost of those systems, regardless of the air quality in that arena, to be able to filter out viruses that we and any airborne illnesses that we don't even know about yet. That is an astronomical cost that is not represented by having an equivalent health indicator. How about Section 3, Item 4B? This is targeted towards unions. This is partisan. It states in there directly that they're looking at unions, and to create this law on an individual business basis, because government has stepped out of this, then it's saying that we have to have unions as a first preference and employees as a second preference to decide what kind of implementation of laws about medical situations must be implemented. I'm sorry, I don't have a doctorate in any medical field. Why am I being consulted on how to address an infectious airborne disease? And how is it possible if my employer says, no, I don't like your answer? Now I have a responsibility, and according to this bill, I have the process to now penalize this business up to $200 per day in some cases that could destroy that business. This bill includes a requirement to limit the number of customers that are able to be in this business and to disperse the employees through social distancing at any time that any kind of airborne disease, which means the flu, is in place. This is a disruption of business and regular business practices. This is a problem. And then we have to look at Section 8D. I'm mentioning this because no one ever gets to hear what section, what part of the bill. I want people to be able to look this up for themselves. Section 8D it's an unreasonable option here where it allows people to say, well, the flu is now going around. I don't want to go to work. And you can. It now removes your ability to have a steady and consistent workforce. This is a problem. Finally, there's Section 2, Item F, which is reducing the customers. So when we look at this in total, the one thing that I keep seeing is that Assemblyman Mantelo, excuse me, got my teeth messed up there. While you made some very good observations and you've made a good challenge, there has been a directed, singular, unilateral vision that empowers government. It grows government. It disenfranchises and nullifies the actual public. And whether that was intentional or not, that is its effect, and it destroys business at the time that we are trying to recover from a recession that is deepening. We have yet to reach the bottom at a time where we haven't even considered the consequences, such as the growth of overdoses, which have reached an all-time high with 81,000 at the end of last year. We're talking about domestic abuse at all-time high records at this moment. It has been since March of 2020. We're talking about depression at record highs that we've never seen. Suicide at record levels. At one point, there were more people in Japan that committed suicide because of the depression of the lockdowns, and we see that in the United States as well, than the number of people who actually contracted COVID, not died, contracted COVID. So when we look at this bill is an example of an overreach of government without having any idea of what the consequences are, without considering any of the science that is involved, and absolutely discounting both the individual and the businesses that have to comply with this monstrous, confused document that is now law in this state. And if I have misunderstood that, if I have misrepresented that, we have two lawyers and an assemblyman, please correct me, but I think I caught it right.
Absolutely correct.
I am not a lawyer or an assemblyman, but I love what you said and how you said it. And let's be real, guys. Let's tie this into this recent this toddler mask mandate. These are the kind of things that happen when we turn over our regulatory power to these agencies. They come up with crazy notions to force children under 5 years old to wear masks in a daycare setting, where They're not following science. They're not following data, and they're simply creating a big, huge virtue signal that encourages people to take a vaccine. And literally what it actually does is chase parents out of New York State, period.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, in that situation, Tim, New York has been oppressing the child care system for a long time. We have a severe lack of child care facilities, so not very many people to comply.
I guess here's my question, and maybe maybe this is for the assemblyman, but what's the supposed upside of this? I mean, you know, there's a lot of downsides, but I mean, I'm no virologist, but I know viruses are very, very small. This escaped from a level 4 lab in Wuhan, China. Even if all these businesses do everything they're supposed to do, I mean, what's really going to be prevented at this point? I mean, I don't know. I mean, viruses have been around. You can blame it on original sin, aliens from outer space, karma, or evolution. Take your pick. Viruses have been around a long time. People get sick. Word I get is 1 out of 1 people die. You know, we're not going to be able to prevent that. So I guess for the promoters of this bill, what's supposed to happen if this goes as planned?
I think that the upside for them is they get reelected. That's really what it's about.
Yeah,
it's just go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with you. They're showing off, and I mean, I'm sure next year or next election cycle, we're all going to get a lot of those very expensive little stiff paper flyers from all of our politicians. That, by the way, in districts like mine, cost over $100,000. Your dollars to send, showing us all of these great things that they did to grow their power and punish our economy, which is what New York does. I mean, is anybody here surprised that New York State government grew its power and punished its economy?
No, but I have a question for you, Assemblyman. Did anyone put together a proposal or a projection saying how much this would cost the average small, mid, or large size business? Did they have a projection of how much pass-through cost would now be inflicted upon consumers who have to pay for, and as an example, a new HVAC air conditioning system that is supposed to be able to filter out viruses at facilities that are open air or available to the public? Has anyone figured out or even guessed at how much this might cost and how long it would take to implement?
No, absolutely not. Because again, they don't care about the cost. They don't care about the business. They don't care about the employer. A lot of the members on the majority side feel that employers should pay for everything, that they can absorb every single cost we want to throw at them. And we continually press that point on the floor, off the floor. And what I'm going to do with Ms. Reyes is I'm going to meet with her and go through this, because I've listened to you tonight, all of you, and you've made up some really good points about the things I've already read. But I'm going to give you my word that I will sit down with her, and I'm going to go through this with her and just tell her exactly what's happening in our area and what's happening to our businesses. Because, no, they just don't care. They think the businesses will always be there.
I have to wonder, how is it possible that we have members of our assembly and our state senate that are putting through laws that literally in 44 minutes, we have gone through both from a legal aspect, a political aspect, and the legislative process has so many flaws and so many loopholes and so many vagaries that it is functionally not only just it's impractical, and it's absolutely ineffective. And the only thing that we can see as a conclusion, and I would love to hear from the proponents of this to counter this, but that is going to harm our communities and individuals due to the taxes and the costs from businesses and pass through, while providing zero protection other than, hey, we're the government, we're here to help you, which has always affected a net loss to everyone. And we are the example for the nation. New York and California are the testing ground of these hyper cradle to grave government covering ideologies. And if it continues here, we will see this implemented across the nation, and it will have a negative impact, not just in New York State, but this will harm every other state as it gets pushed through, as long as people do not stop and say, it's neither effective nor is it practical. Why are we doing it? That is the message I would send to Governor Cuomo and the Assembly, if you can pass it on to your fellow members, because I would love to hear their response.
That's actually an excellent point, because we are a battleground state for policy in the nation, as is California, and I think we can throw Texas and Florida in there too. When policy gets pushed forward and passed in states that have more power, we see it spread across the country. We've seen that with every piece of legislation that has detrimented our rights, our economy, and our happiness.
If I can chime in, mention happiness, which reminds me of the immortal words of the Declaration, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I got to say, this is so backwards, because we gotta get back to the notion that our rights come from God and that government is instituted to secure those rights. The government's not here to regulate every last aspect of what we do. We should have a right to property. We should have a right to contract. We should have a right to pursue happiness. We should have a right to have laws that are reasonable. And pretty sadly, from everything I've heard, too many people up in Albany are looking at this about 180 degrees in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. I'd like to point something out about risk. Life is risk. Every moment that we are doing this show, we are at risk of something. Viruses, they're very minuscule. They're hard to spot. That's a risk. That's something that exists. It's going to happen. And from my own personal perspective, because of my condition, I'm actually at risk of death with the common cold. You know what I didn't have through this pandemic? Fear. I understood that risk exists in life. And yes, did I pay attention? Absolutely. When I was out in public, did I wear a mask? Absolutely. Do I wash my hands? Well, that's normal anyhow. But, there are so many statistics for so many variations of risk, death, and injury out there. I think our lawyer here understands this. I think Jim Dayton, being a contractor, probably understands that there's a risk of somebody who's working on his next story up dropping a hammer. There are risks for every single aspect of our life. Does that mean that we need to be willy-nilly and carefree and not pay attention to what's going on? No. But we do need to understand that the government will never be big enough, bad enough, and powerful enough to eliminate risk. It can't do it. It cannot do it.
I remember many years ago, one of the elders in my church said to me, Brian, we are going to try to make our society so safe that we will completely bankrupt it. And that's what we see happening.
Yeah.
He was absolutely right.
Can I jump in for a second? I just want to point out to Mr. Mankdell that thank you for being here. I feel like there's a little guilt by association going on, and I so far I've really enjoyed your answer. So I don't want you to feel uncomfortable with us and our performance here. I feel as though your answers are forthright. I'm a big fan of rejecting the premises of some of these laws, and now this law has been enacted. But I do have a question for you, and I think you kind of touched on it, but do you have ideas that you see as solutions to end this crazy train of virtue signaling legislation that comes out of Albany nearly every single day of every single legislative session? We see something else that average people who want to live their lives, who value freedom, it's important to us. So we're looking for solutions. Libertarians love solutions. And so I want to give you the floor to offer some of your solutions and help bring us your view on that.
Well, I think the first solution is we never give up. Okay? We never, ever, ever give up. Because if we give up, they will win. Secondly, I think we continue, and I'm not talking about politicians, I'm talking about you and I as people. I think we need to continue to fight for our country. We know who we are, what America is about, and what we stand for. And you know, do I hope we ever have an internal war? Nope. But someday somebody's going to draw the line in the sand and say, we've had enough. Will it be bad? It could be bad. But at the same time, I don't want to lose our America. This is who we are. This is what we fought for. This is what we've defended this country for, not just for us, but for our children and grandchildren. We as Americans I'm a proud American. I love our country. I love what we stand for and what we do. And I think we continue to fight in the trenches outside of government, because government's there to support us, not the other way around. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to run for office, higher office, is, being a business guy, a family guy, a Christian guy, and being involved in local politics. I know what works and doesn't work. And I will give everything I possibly have to make sure we don't lose our country. Just like our forefathers that created everything we had to start with. If you ever have a chance, read about the original forefathers and what they lost. They were farmers. I don't know if there was any attorneys in there, I believe so, but some of them lost everything. Some of them were killed. Some of them died. And this is what we need to stand for. And people like you and I, this is what we need to stand for. And we just continue to keep pushing. And that's just a 2.5 cent idea of who we are and how we change it. I think we change from the bottom up, not from the top down. I think we need to change the top going down, but I think we still continue to fight from the bottom up.
Actually, Assemblyman, on that thought, let me ask you a very important question.
Sure.
Whenever we run into any kind of new legislation, and we can see that's going to be bad, the best time to stop it is before it is implemented. Because once something is implemented, whether it's at the state level or federal level, it never goes away. It only grows larger. It only becomes more costly. It only becomes more inefficient and more ineffective. That is just a fact of government. We've seen that for 50 years in my lifetime and long before that. So the best way we can remove this, I would think, would be a repeal. How can people who are watching this, who are listening to this, can reach out to you, and maybe there are others that you could name, or a process that we can say, please stop this before you go further. You're harming us. We support removing this bill or defunding this bill, or what would be the proper process?
Well, I think we can, of course, you can write the governor's office, and you can send all sorts of emails and letters. Probably won't accomplish a whole lot. They'll just take a look at them. But if you look at the co-sponsors and sponsors of this bill, all this information on how to contact them is available. And we come out and ask them, look, we need to repeal this bill. We need to amend this bill. And that's something I'll talk to our legal staff down in Albany on Monday and see what else we can do from the minority side to help our people back home. And they're very good at doing what they do. They're very good about bringing these bills out at the last minute, so we don't have a lot of time to prepare and debate and get the message out to the people that we represent. This is what they do. So we have 2 more weeks of session, and session will be done for this year, or supposedly. So we have 2 weeks to really act on any of this. But in the off season, we need to continue to push our values. And then this is what I tell people that want to move out of the state. Please don't. I love our state. I love New York State. I don't like our government right now in New York State, but we have a beautiful state, a beautiful country, and a beautiful area. It's worth fighting for, and I will never give up, and that's what it's about. So my job, from my perspective, is I'll reach out to these members and try to bring some of them up here to see our way of life and what it's about. So those are just some of my ideas and some of my thoughts, and that's what people can do. Contact these legislators and tell them how unhappy you are with this.
I'd like to back up Tim for thanking Mr. Mentolo. I believe he asked us to call you Brian, for being here and for your positions and your willingness to be the guy going against this. And as well as our other 2 guests, Anthony and James. We really appreciate you coming here. We really appreciate you interacting with us and helping us put on this display for people to learn, and that's important. I think Michael was getting to that point. People need to follow the legislation that's going on, and as Brian stated, they need to write the legislators when they disagree. They need to potentially even write their newspaper op-eds, in district, that they do get read. Do that. One of the problems with that is that so many people are so busy trying to survive, they don't really have time to pay attention. And they only get the tidbits in the news and the sensationalism. So, to that note, if you have the mind of a bookworm, if you like to read things and understand them, pay attention to the New York State website. Watch that legislation as it comes through.
I think one of the other large things that we can do as individuals in New York State is look at our children. Look at what they're being taught in the school systems. Look at what they're being taught in the colleges. We need to get our children involved. We need to teach them right and wrong, what's good government and bad government. You and I may not see the fruits of that, but down the road, them and their families will. I think that's where we strive to get them involved, because we need to do that. Where the other side has already done that, we need to counter that and get our children involved and teach them what's right and wrong and what to stand for.
Couldn't agree more. I don't have a significant other or children, but I do have 7 nieces and nephews, and that's why I'm active in politics. That's why I pay attention, and I think if we all thought like that, just as you suggested, Assemblyman, we'd all be better off. You have to think of the future. The future always starts today, and if we want to keep our humanity and our society, we need to keep our economic irresponsibility out of our government.
Absolutely, brother. Hey, I got a quick hypothetical. First of all, guys, we're coming up on an hour. This question I'm about to ask might take us a little bit over the hour. But so before I ask it, I want to thank particularly because this question is going to be for the lawyers, and we're going to see how they handle it. But Mr. Michael, I appreciate you being here. Mr. Vasquez, I've enjoyed your broadcast. I saw you on Larry Sharp. I met you at Spike Cohen's event down in Binghamton, and I think you're a great guy. You're a great voice for liberty. I know you're a conservative, but I think in your heart you're really a libertarian, and we'll get you there.
Michael hears that every time I see him.
Yes, absolutely, man. I love that guy. He's great. So a question for the lawyers, and this is not just a hypothetical. This is based on a true story. Okay, a friend of mine, his wife went into work. She refused to wear a mask because none of the other employees were wearing a mask. Her boss is like, "Are you vaccinated?" She's like, "None of your business." Her boss says, "Go home." What's going to happen with that? This is kind of a true story, so I'm not going to name names, but what's going to happen with that? And age before beauty, Mr. Sacco, what do you say on this one?
Well, when the employer said go home, was she fired or just a day without pay, or?
That's unclear at this point. We don't know for sure.
Well, we'll assume for the purposes of the situation was some form of adverse action, so that there was some form of damages. I mean, I think this is uncharted territory right now. I can tell you this, though, the cynic in me is that there's just so much political pressure. And I have seen the courts do so many things in the last 15 months that are absolutely outrageous from the standpoint of everything I have known about the rule of law and the Bill of Rights and all that. My sense would be that that would be fine. I can tell you this. Now, I'm just going to hedge a little bit to see, because I don't know, is there a HIPAA issue? Is there some federal issue that could fit in? But I do know that New York is, and it's kind of like Swiss cheese, where the rule is still you're an employee at will unless there's a contract or something. Okay. However, this is the rule. The exceptions are this big, right? So there's 1,000,001 reasons. So in other words, you can be fired for no reason, but you can't be fired for a bad reason, race, creed, something like that. how would the courts look at it if you got fired because you weren't wearing a mask? I think they'd be fine with it. Or because you didn't get the vaccine. It's a little bit tough because, you still do have that law that says you can't mandate, an emergency use vaccine. Colleges are requiring it, though, and they don't seem to be a problem. So I guess from what I've seen the last 15 months, every rule I have grown up with and I learned in law school and has been part of my practice has been just jettisoned. It's just, I mean, I can tell you, I have a client and, he's in jail, and you think I'd have a right to just speak privately with the client. Oh, no, it's remote. I'm like, you can't do that, So anyways, that's a very long-winded way of saying the cynic in me says, I think the courts are going to be absolutely fine with that. But I don't know if Anthony has another opinion or more information.
I really agree mostly with Jim's response, and that's because it's uncharted territory. However, if I was representing this employee, where I would start is demanding a copy of the employee handbook and to see what's in writing. What type of policies do they have in writing that this employee needs to follow? Because, like Jim pointed out, employment at will is the default rule, but yes, it is Swiss cheese rule. And to find and try to nestle into some exception, it's not a contract of employment, but it is a government document. And perhaps there could be information in that could assist this employee with dealing with that adverse action. So employees who are hesitant to be vaccinated don't want any undue requirements on them, just generally because they have liberty, right? They should be asking, demanding their employee handbooks so that they know the rights that their employer has bestowed upon them. And my closing point on that is we talked a bit about how the state has exempted itself from this. And I find that very, very curious for a number of reasons, and one of which is because, as Jim knows, the Constitution protects us from the government, not from private parties, not from your employer necessarily, unless there's regulations, statutes, codification on that. So it's like the government having private businesses do their dirty work, and not leaving us with much recourse as far as it comes to constitutional challenges. So with your hypothetical, though, Tim, I'd be curious if the EEOC would pick up on that and take that to the next level. But politics are on the employer side of that hypothetical. Yeah. Last little comment. Everywhere up here in Syracuse, the greater Syracuse area, no one's wearing masks unless the place requires it. Right? And guess who still requires it? Most of these public buildings do not, but the unified court system does. I was just at Supreme Court, had to have a mask, put the temperature up to my forehead. Syracuse City Court the other day, same thing. So they are on that political side of the aisle, and I think they would side with the employer because there's the law, there's the facts, and there's politics. We can't forget about the politics.
We got to do away with politics, fellas. Rights and reason should be exempted from politics at this point. I've had it. Thank you very much, guys, for that thoughtful answer. I appreciate it. Send a bill to the LPNY for your for the consult.
Rich, can't hear.
Voice is off.
Muted. Sorry, I had to unmute. Any more closing thoughts out there? We'd like to close up. We're a little over an hour. I'd like to finish up in the next few minutes. Anyone else have any?
I'm all set. I just want to thank everybody for being here.
Yeah. Great audience. Great discussion. Michael?
Just want to say I thank you all for being here, especially you, Brian. Yeah, you put up with a lot that's not directed at you, but directed at the system and the process. And I thank you for hearing our voices on that. I want to thank Jim and Anthony. You guys have some great insight, and you made the legal something that's understandable to people, because usually it isn't. And I just want to thank everyone for having the opportunity to speak with the public and say, hey, we need to be more aware, and we need to take action, support the people like Brian who are supporting us, and let's make sure we support the people who are bringing this to us in all the different formats, paying attention and saying, yeah, I'm aware. Things only happen when we're not aware, and we can stop this.
Yeah, to Michael's point, to everyone out there who's listening, who is concerned, maybe you own a business, on the Senate and Assembly websites, and I think Brian will back me up here, you can look up their votes. You can see what your senator and your assemblyman voted for, and you can vote them out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I said in an opinion piece a couple months ago as A2681 was being debated that anyone that voted for it should be voted out, and I still stand by that. And that means about 3/4 of the legislature should get the boot. This was an atrocious bill. Anyone that voted for it was a damn fool, as I'm concerned. And people that know me don't hear me curse very often, but it's just a very bad demonstration of poor judgment and poor character and poor wisdom. And it's shameful that about 3/4 of the legislature voted for this thing.
Yes.
It's really shameful.
Senate District 52 is going to have an option there to vote for a guy that would not vote for A2681, right? Tom?
District 52 had an option.
No, they're going to next election cycle, and that guy needs to know it. Period. I don't care what letter's next to his name.
Yep, doesn't matter the letter. It's just anyone that voted for this thing should be out of office next year, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't care what their party.
Brian did not vote for it.
Yep.
I have the numbers right here in front of me. In the Senate, it was 46-17. In the Assembly, it was 95-55.
Yeah,
we are all familiar with who voted for what on that one. Believe me, sir. I want you to know that.
Yeah. Yep. All righty. Any final thoughts? And one quick housekeeping detail. So this was put out live to Facebook, several channels, but I'm going to put it up on my YouTube page shortly. I know some people are going away from Facebook. Good for them. Some of us are kind of stuck with it. That's our outreach, but maybe a lot of us here, maybe of us 8, maybe some of us will be dropping out or forced to leave in the near future. Who knows? So I will put this up on YouTube shortly, and anyone can always message me if they want to have a copy of that. I'll probably download as an MP4 file, which will be obviously quite large, being over an hour. So, but there'll be other ways to get this video if anyone's interested. So, any last final seconds?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Rich, for reading our article and reaching out to me. I'm glad to find this group. I didn't know about this group, and being a libertarian, that like Michael means more conservative, but I guess we'll just have to let them keep persuading us, Michael. I'm glad to have found you guys, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. All right, I'm gonna end the broadcast now.
Okay, thank you.